You have been operating a reality tuning device your entire life without realizing it. Not a magical object, not a secret ritual. A living interface, your nervous system constantly translating your internal state into signals that shape what you notice, what you choose, and what you allow to become real in the world around you. There is a reason this idea feels both obvious and forbidden. If you truly accepted what I'm about to describe, you would stop treating emotions as problems to solve, symptoms to medicate, or bad states to overpower through willpower and shame. You would stop seeing your inner life as an inconvenience that interrupts productivity, and you would start seeing it as an instrument, one that can be played unconsciously or played with intention. Here is the core shift. What you call emotions are not just private feelings happening inside your head. They are states of the whole body, patterns of physiology, attention, meaning, and energy. They change your breathing, your muscle tone, your heart rhythm, your posture, your micro-expressions, your decision speed, and the stories your brain generates about what is safe, what is possible, and what is about to happen. In other words, emotions are not only experiences, they are instruction, they are signals, they are information. And those signals broadcast, not in a mystical sense that requires blind belief, but in a practical sense. Your state influences the field of your life. It determines what you perceive, what you ignore, what you interpret as threat, what you interpret as opportunity, and which actions you repeatedly choose. This is why two people can walk into the same room and step into entirely different realities. One person sees danger, another sees possibility. One person hears criticism, another hears guidance. Same room, different channel. Most people treat emotions like weather, random internal storms that arrive uninvited and must be endured, suppressed, or fixed as quickly as possible. But what if every emotion is actually precise feedback about which probability channel you're currently tuned to? What if anxiety is not only a warning about danger, but also a signal that your system is scanning for threat and organizing your attention around loss, scarcity, and control? What if joy is not only feeling good, but evidence that your system is coherent, open, connected, receptive, and therefore more likely to notice solutions, relationship, and favorable timing? When you understand emotions as tuning states rather than personal failures, everything changes. Not just how you feel, but what you repeatedly create. Because you stop fighting the instrument, you learn to operate it. Let's get clear about what is actually happening in your body when an emotion rises. Your brain is not generating a purely subjective mood that floats in isolation. It is coordinating a whole body pattern. Your nervous system shifts gears. Hormones change. Your attention narrows or expands. Your memory retrieval changes. Your sense of time changes. Your behavior changes. And with behavior, outcomes change. The outside world starts responding differently, not because the universe is granting wishes, but because you are showing up as a different version of yourself with different signals, different boundaries, and different choices. Some researchers discuss this in the language of neural oscillations and coherence, how different states of mind correlate with different patterns of brain activity, and how coherence between systems, brain heart breath, tends to support clarity and regulation. Others describe it in the language of conditioning and prediction, how the brain constantly forecasts reality based on prior experience, and how emotions are part of that predictive model. And many spiritual traditions describe it in the language of resonance, how you meet life at the level of your internal state and life meets you back. You don't have to pick one vocabulary to understand the mechanism. The point is the same. Your inner state is not passive, it is causative. Now here is where the mainstream conversation often breaks down. Even when people accept that emotions influence behavior, they still treat emotions like enemies. They judge them. They categorize them as good or bad. They try to eliminate what feels uncomfortable. They try to force positivity on top of pain. They try to perform calm while their body is screaming. They try to think their way out of fear while their nervous system remains locked in threat. And the more they fight the emotion, the louder it gets. Why? Because suppression doesn't remove a state. It adds a second state, resistance. Imagine anxiety rises. Immediately your conditioning labels it, this is bad. I shouldn't feel this. I need to stop it. So you tense, distract, overthink, scroll, numb, rehearse arguments, catastrophize, pretend, push. You're not dissolving the anxiety. You're layering tension on top of it. You're adding internal conflict. Instead of one clear signal, you now have competing signals, the original emotional state and the resistance state. One part of you is broadcasting threat. Another part of you is broadcasting control. One part is saying something is wrong. Another part is saying I must not feel this. The result is not relief. The result is interference, mental noise, body tightness, unstable attention, unpredictable reaction. And when your internal signal is unstable, your external life starts to feel unstable too. This is why chronic suppression often produces the very outcomes people fear. Not because the universe is punishing them, but because suppression keeps the nervous system in a loop. Threat is present, threat is resisted, threat intensifies, threat becomes the lens through which everything is filtered. The mind becomes hyper-vigilant. It overselects evidence that confirms danger. It misses information that could resolve the situation. It chooses defensive actions that create defensive results. It thinks it is preventing pain, but it is rehearsing pain again and again until the rehearsal becomes reality. The same mechanism shows up with anger. If anger rises and you suppress it, you don't delete it. You split your signal. On the surface, you perform calm, but underneath your system holds activation. The body stays ready to fight. The jaw tightens. The shoulders rise. The voice changes. Your boundaries become inconsistent. The anger leaks out sideways as sarcasm, passive aggression, coldness, sudden explosions, or physical symptoms that make no sense until you realize your system is carrying conflict it was never allowed to complete. Suppress sadness and you don't become happy. You become numb. You create a gap between what is true and what you allow yourself to feel. That gap is disconnection. It can look like productivity. It can look like I'm fine. But inside, it is flatness. And flatness often tunes you into the isolation channel because connection requires authenticity. If you can't feel what you feel, you can't truly meet life. You can only manage life. And managing life is not the same as living it. This is why so many self-improvement strategies backfire. They aren't wrong because effort is bad. They backfire because they treat emotions as enemies instead of information. They try to force a new reality while broadcasting an old signal. They try to manifest abundance while their body is still transmitting scarcity. They try to speak confidence while their nervous system is still organized around fear of judgment. They try to act like the future self, but internally, they are still loyal to the past self's protection. That loyalty is what keeps the channel locked. So what is the alternative? The paradigm shift that changes everything is simple, but not easy. Stop relating to emotional states as feelings that require judgment, management, or control. Start recognizing them as broadcast signals carrying precise information about which reality channel your system is currently tuned to. That does not mean never feel anxiety. It means you stop making anxiety your commander. It does not mean anger is bad. It means you learn how to let anger complete its message without letting it destroy your life. It does not mean sadness is weakness. It means you allow sadness to do what it is designed to do, process loss, release attachment, soften the heart, and make room for a new chapter. When you treat emotions as signals, you regain agency. Because you stop asking, how do I get rid of this? And you start asking, what channel am I on? And do I want to stay here? Now we can talk about mechanics, practical steps that stabilize your broadcast rather than scramble it. Step 1 is awareness without shame. The moment you notice an emotion, name it without moral judgment. Not as a label of identity, I am anxious, but as a state anxiety is present, that language matters. Identity locks the channel. State creates space. Space gives you choice. Step 2 is regulation before interpretation. Most people interpret first and regulate later. They feel fear and instantly generate stories. They feel tension and instantly decide something is wrong with them. Reverse it. Breathe lower. Relax the jaw. Unclench the hand. Slow the exhale. Bring the system out of emergency mode before you decide what the feeling means. When the body calms, the mind becomes accurate. Step 3 is signal completion instead of suppression. Emotions are waves. They rise, peak, and fall when allowed to move. Suppression freezes them mid-wave. Completion lets them pass. This can be as simple as allowing the sensation to exist for 90 seconds without trying to change it, feeling it in the body, not narrating it in the mind. You're not feeding it. You're not fighting it. You're letting the wave complete. Step 4 is conscious channel selection. Once the signal is clear and the body is regulated enough to choose you, ask a direct question. What reality does this state build if you stayed in this frequency for days? What would it create? Who would you become? What would you miss? Then ask, what frequency matches my future, not as a fake smile, not as forced positivity, but as the state your future self would hold while taking the next aligned step. This is the key. You don't choose a frequency by pretending. You choose it by acting. A single aligned action is the fastest way to change your internal state. If your nervous system is broadcasting helplessness, one small act of agency shifts the channel. If it is broadcasting scarcity, one act of stewardship, organizing, planning, creating shifts the channel. If it is broadcasting disconnection, one act of honest connection shifts the channel. The field responds to what you reinforce, not what you wish. And this is why control is the wrong goal. Control creates tension. Coherence creates power. Coherence means your thoughts, emotions, and actions are telling the same story. Your body is not broadcasting fear while your mouth performs confidence. Your nervous system is not broadcasting scarcity while your mind chants abundance. You are not splitting your signal. When you become coherent, reality stops feeling random. Opportunities become more visible. Timing becomes more noticeable. Decisions become cleaner. Your boundaries become stronger. Your relationships become clearer. Not because life becomes perfect, but because you stop scrambling the broadcast with internal war. This is the moment where the idea of reality tuning becomes practical. You are not trying to bend the universe with imagination alone. You are learning how to stop sabotaging your own signal. You are learning how to let your emotional instrument speak clearly, then choose the channel you want to inhabit. And yes, this changes what manifests, because manifestation, in the most grounded sense, is what repeatedly results from your repeated state. It is what your nervous system rehearses until it becomes your baseline. It is what your choices confirm. It is what your environment mirrors back. So stop asking, how do I fix my emotions? Ask, what are they telling me about my current channel? Ask, what interference am I creating? By resisting them, ask, what would coherence look like right now? Then do the simplest, most honest thing: regulate, allow, choose, act. Your emotions are not your enemy. They are your tuning system. And once you stop fighting the instrument, you can finally play it on purpose, selecting moment by moment the reality you are most ready to become. Every emotional frequency that rises in your system is giving you real-time channel feedback. It is not random weather inside your head. It is data. It is a live readout of what your nervous system is amplifying in your attention, your physiology, and through the choices. Those states drive the probability space you keep collapsing into lived experience. When you learn to read emotional frequencies as information rather than judging them as good or bad, you gain something most people never touch: conscious awareness of which version of reality you are actively building. You stop being dragged around by urgency. You stop negotiating with shame. You stop treating your inner life like a malfunction. You begin treating it like instrumentation. And instrumentation doesn't ask to be punished. It asks to be calibrated. Start with anxiety. The moment anxiety rises, most people assume it is proof that danger is present. They treat it like prophecy. They treat it like an emergency. They let it hijack planning, speech, posture, behavior. But anxiety is not a crystal ball. It is a channel indicator. It tells you that your system has tuned toward threat, toward scanning, anticipating, controlling, bracing. In that state, your attention becomes selective in a very specific direction. You notice risks before you notice resources. You interpret ambiguity as warning. You prioritize short-term safety over long-term expansion. You rehearse failure scenarios so often that they begin to feel like truth. And because your attention and actions follow your state, the field of your life begins to align with that state. Not because reality is cursed, but because your nervous system is shaping what you perceive and what you do moment by moment until your outcomes reflect the same channel you've been broadcasting. Read correctly. Anxiety isn't telling you you're in danger. It's telling you you're tuned to the threat channel. That distinction changes everything. Because if it is a channel, you can retune. You can shift the pattern before it hardens into behavior, before it becomes decisions, before it becomes consequences. This reframes the entire relationship with anxiety. Instead of trying to eliminate it because it feels unpleasant, and instead of obeying it because it feels urgent, you treat it as a diagnostic signal. You listen. You locate it in the body. You ask what it is protecting. You notice what it is pulling your attention toward. You allow it to speak without letting it drive. And in doing so, you gain the space to choose a different channel. Joy works the same way, but most people misunderstand it too. Joy is not just a pleasant feeling. It is a state of openness, coherence, receptivity. In joy, the body is less defended. The breath is fuller. The mind is more flexible. You see connections you would miss in threat. You notice opportunities you would overlook in contraction. You take risks that align with growth. You communicate in a way that invites support. You create. Joy in this framework is feedback that you're tuned to what we can call the opportunity channel, where the mind is more likely to detect solutions, where behavior is more likely to be generative, where relationships are more likely to form cleanly, because you're broadcasting availability rather than defense. It is not lucky. It is coherent. Anger is another frequency that people have been trained to fear. Many cultures treat anger as inherently destructive. But anger is often a boundary signal. It is the body's way of saying something is crossing a line, something is draining you, something is being taken without consent. Something's being compromised. Anger is not a command to attack. It is information about sovereignty. If you suppress anger, you don't become peaceful, you become split. You perform calm while your physiology stays activated. The signal goes underground and leaks out as resentment, passive aggression, cynicism, sudden outbursts, or chronic tension. If you amplify anger through rumination and revenge fantasies, you feed the flame and keep your system locked in conflict. But if you read anger as a boundary indicator, it becomes useful. It tells you exactly where you need to reclaim energy, reinforce limits, speak truth, or redirect your attention. Anger does not have to control your behavior. It can inform your behavior. Depression or deep low energy states require the most care in how we speak about them. People often feel blamed by spiritual language that implies their pain is simply a frequency problem. That framing is not only insensitive, it is inaccurate. A low energy state can be a complex interplay of biology, environment, trauma, sleep deprivation, nutrition, chronic stress, loneliness, grief, and meaning collapse. But even within that complexity, there is still a signal you can read. The system has dropped into minimal output. Motivation decline. Perception narrows. The future feels unavailable. The world feels heavy. Options feel distant. In frequency language, it's as if the system is broadcasting too slowly to sustain forward movement. Few possibilities feel reachable. Nothing selects cleanly because the body and mind are exhausted from carrying too much for too long. The data here is not you're broken. The data is you need recalibration. And recalibration begins with safety support and gentle structure, not with self-violence. Once you start reading emotional states as channel indicators rather than moral judgments, you stop trying to control them into silence. You receive the data. You decide what to do with it. You respond rather than react. Now, here is the principle that turns this from an interesting philosophy into a usable practice. Emotional frequencies have natural life cycles. They rise. They peak. They shift. If you allow them to complete their wave, they move. If you interrupt them with resistance or feed them with amplification, they stay. This is where most people get stuck. They never experience the natural completion of an emotional wave because they do one of two things: immediately resist it or amplify it. Resistance includes suppression, denial, distraction, avoidance, forced positivity, performing calm, shaming yourself for feeling what you feel. Resistance creates internal conflict. The body stays activated, but now it's activated against itself. That inner battle generates noise, mental chatter, muscle tension, exhaustion. The original signal doesn't disappear, it becomes tangled. Amplification includes rumination, catastrophic storytelling, replaying memories, rehearsing arguments, identifying with the emotion as who I am, feeding it with attention until it becomes an identity. Amplification is how a brief wave becomes an all-day storm, not because the emotion is evil, but because you are repeatedly refiring the same pattern. The practice that changes everything is deceptively simple. When a frequency arises, allow it to broadcast cleanly without adding resistance and without adding fuel. You don't suppress. You don't feed. You let it rise, peak, and pass as a wave. In practical terms, this looks like a 90-second window of permission. You notice the emotion. You name it as a state, not an identity. You locate it physically. You let your breath soften. You stop narrating. You do not try to fix anything. You just allow the sensation to move through the body. For many people, if they truly stop resisting and truly stop feeding, the intensity shifts within a minute or two. Not because the emotion wasn't real, but because the wave completed its primary cycle. What remains after the wave is not numbness or suppression. What remains is clarity. You can finally hear the information underneath the sensation. You can see what thought pattern triggered it. You can see what boundary was crossed. You can see what fear is requesting protection. You can see what desire is asking for movement. You are no longer inside the wave. You are observing the wave. This is the difference between being possessed by a frequency and receiving a frequency. When you allow anxiety to run cleanly for that window, without wrestling it and without catastrophizing, you can often feel the exact moment it peaks and begins to shift. And in that moment, you gain a startling kind of precision. You notice what your mind was scanning for. You notice what assumption was guiding your attention. You notice which belief structure was tuning you toward threat. That awareness gives you choice. Retuning becomes possible. When you allow anger to run cleanly without suppressing it and without feeding it, you can access its message without letting it turn into harm. Anger becomes a straight line to the truth, where your yes has been coerced, where your energy is being siphoned, where your boundaries have become porous. When the wave completes the system, can retune into determination, clarity, or calm firmness, the frequencies that allow protective action without destruction. When you allow sadness to run cleanly, it often does what it was designed to do: release. It processes endings, grief, disillusionment, the closing of chapters. It clears attachment. It makes space. When sadness is permitted to complete, it can open into neutrality or spaciousness. And that neutrality is powerful. It is the reset point from which entirely new channels become available. Now we have to talk about the variable that determines how powerfully your state translates into consistent outcomes: coherence. Coherence is the clarity and stability of your internal signal. It is what happens when your body, mind, and behavior are aligned, rather than in conflict. Coherent frequencies are clean transmissions. Incoherent frequencies are noisy, contaminated by inner contradiction, shame, suppression, and mental chaos. Coherence is why two people can feel positive but manifest very different results. One person is smiling while terrified. Another person is calm, grounded, and genuinely open. From the outside, both look fine. Internally, one is broadcasting conflict, the other is broadcasting alignment. And reality, through perception, behavior, and social response, mirrors coherence more reliably than performance. When your signal is coherent, a state becomes sustained enough to guide consistent action. A coherent opportunity state leads to consistent exploration, consistent conversation, consistent creativity, consistent follow-through. This is why people who live in coherent joy seem to attract opportunities. They notice them. They respond to them. They act in ways that invite them. Their frequency isn't diluted by constant internal debate. Coherence is also why people in coherent determination accomplish outcomes that seem impossible to observers. Determination is not frantic. It is not desperation. It is a focused channel, one intention, one direction, repeated aligned action. The signal is clear, so the behavior is consistent, so the results accumulate. To an outsider, it looks like luck or power. Internally, it is coherence, and coherence is trainable. You build it by stopping the war inside. You build it by allowing waves to complete rather than freezing them. You build it by choosing regulation before interpretation. You build it by practicing honesty, aligning your words, actions, and boundaries with what you actually feel and know. You build it by selecting one small aligned action when you would normally spiral. This is the point where your emotional life stops being something that happens to you and becomes something you can read, respect, and recalibrate. Not through control. Through literacy. Emotional literacy is frequency literacy. It is the ability to identify the channel you're on, understand what it is amplifying, and decide without violence and without avoidance whether you want to stay there. The goal is not to live in one permanent high vibration state. That is not human. The goal is to become coherent across state, to let each frequency deliver its data and complete its cycle, to stop feeding the channels that shrink you, to practice the channels that expand you, to become the kind of person whose baseline state naturally selects better probabilities because your nervous system is no longer trapped in threat as a default. Once you understand this, emotions stop being enemies. They become navigation. They tell you in real time what you are broadcasting. They reveal in real time what you are rehearsing. They show you in real time what your next retune should be. And with that, the tuning device you've been carrying your entire life finally becomes conscious. You stop waiting for reality to change before you feel different. You change the channel, clean the signal, and take the aligned step that makes a different reality possible. Determination generates a coherent, focused signal. It is the frequency of completion of movement that does not depend on mood, applause, or ideal condition. In your lived experience, determination feels like a clean inner yes. It feels like the decision has already been made. It feels like you have stopped negotiating with hesitation. And once that internal negotiation ends, something stabilizes the mind, stops scattering the body, stops leaking energy in 10 directions, and your actions begin to stack in one direction, long enough to create momentum. In the language we've been using, determination corresponds to a coherent range, often described as a higher, more activated band than fear or sadness. But the exact number matters far less than the mechanics. Determination produces signal clarity, and signal clarity produces consistent behavior, and consistent behavior produces results regardless of external obstacles that would derail a person whose signal is fragmented. This is why determination seems almost supernatural to people who haven't experienced it. From the outside, it looks like someone just keeps going. From the inside, it feels like coherence, one identity, one direction, repeated aligned action. But most people never experience truly coherent broadcasting, not because they lack discipline, and not because they're doing life wrong, but because they are transmitting multiple conflicting signals at the same time. They want a new reality, yet they rehearse the old one. They broadcast desire while simultaneously broadcasting doubt. They broadcast hope while also broadcasting fear. They broadcast confidence in words while their nervous system broadcasts unworthiness through posture avoidance and self-cancellation. When multiple frequencies run at once, they don't neatly cancel each other out. They create interference, inner static. Your attention becomes unstable. Your decisions become inconsistent. Your behavior becomes unpredictable. You move forward, then retreat. You start, then stop. You commit, then sabotage. You tell yourself you want transformation, but your body keeps choosing familiarity. This is why manifestation feels unreliable for so many people. It's not because reality is cruel. It's because the broadcast is incoherent. The channel keeps changing mid-sentence. The signal keeps breaking up. Here is the counterintuitive truth. Coherence does not come from forcing yourself into positive frequency while suppressing negative frequency. Coherence does not come from performing joy on top of fear. It does not come from pretending you're fine when your body is flooded. That approach creates the very interference we've been describing. Your words transmit one thing while your nervous system transmits another. That split is static, and static weakens every outcome. Coherence comes from clean transmission. Clean transmission means whatever frequency is present is allowed to be present without adding a second conflicting frequency through resistance and without extending the frequency artificially through amplification. You let the wave ride. You let it peak. You let it complete. And then you choose. When fear arises and you allow it to broadcast cleanly without suppression and without catastrophic storytelling, the fear frequency becomes coherent. It communicates its message clearly. It completes its cycle cleanly. And your system naturally retunes. You are no longer stuck in fear. You are informed by fear. That difference is everything. Because once the wave completes, your internal field is no longer contaminated by leftover tension from suppression or by lingering intensity from rumination. You are free for the next organic frequency to arise coherently. This is what many researchers describe as emotional flexibility, the ability to move through states without becoming trapped in loop. In our framework, it's not only emotional flexibility, it is broadcast flexibility. And broadcast flexibility changes your life because it changes what channels are accessible to you in any given moment. When you are stuck in chronic threat, the only options you can see are threat compatible. When you are flexible, you can move from fear into neutrality, from neutrality into curiosity, from curiosity into determination, from determination into completion. You can change the channel before it becomes a destiny. Now we need to go further because your broadcast does not exist in isolation. Your nervous system is constantly interfacing with the broadcasts of other nervous systems. This is not a poetic metaphor. It is a practical reality of being human. We entrain. We synchronize. We influence each other through tone expression, pace, eye contact, voice proximity, and shared attention. Your body reads other bodies long before your mind forms an opinion. When you walk into a space where multiple people are broadcasting coherent fear, an anxious family gathering, a high-stress workplace, a conflict-saturated home, you can feel it immediately. The air feels tight. Your breathing changes. Your shoulders lift. Your thoughts speed up. You might not even know why, but your system starts scanning. You begin to tune toward the dominant frequency of that room. This is the mechanics behind emotional contagion. People imagine it as purely psychological empathy. I'm picking up their mood. But the deeper reality is that bodies synchronize. When oscillating systems are in proximity, they tend to entrain. Your nervous system begins matching the pattern that dominates the environment, unless you have the coherence to maintain your own. This has profound implications. If you enter a fear-saturated environment while broadcasting coherent calm, one of two outcomes will occur. Either your system will entrain to the collective fear, pulling you into the same threat channel everyone else is amplifying, or your coherent calm will begin shifting the collective field itself, subtly retuning the room toward a calmer channel. Which outcome occurs depends on two variables: coherence and amplitude. Coherence is signal purity. Amplitude is signal strength, how stable, embodied, and sustained the state is in your physiology. If your calm is fragile, if it is mental performance rather than embodied regulation, the collective fear will pull you. You will catch the room. You will leave feeling drained, reactive, or anxious without understanding why. But if your calm is coherent, rooted in breath, posture, nervous system regulation, and clear boundaries, then your signal can act as an anchor. You become what some people call holding space, but now we can name it precisely: You are introducing a stable frequency into an unstable field. This is why certain rare individuals appear to carry stability with them. Their experience remains consistent even when the environment is chaotic. Not because they deny reality, but because they are broadcasting such coherent internal regulation that their local probability field remains stable. They do not entrain easily. They influence more than they absorb. When you develop this capacity, your emotional work stops being only personal. It becomes collective. Your coherence contributes to the consensus reality experience by those around you, your family, your team, your clients, your community. You become a stabilizer, a recalibrator, a signal that makes better outcomes more accessible to the whole group. That is not mysticism. It is leadership. Now, let's turn this into a protocol, something operational. Not positive thinking, not psychological reframing, direct mechanics. The first practice is frequency recognition. Throughout your day, train yourself to notice shifts in your internal oscillation before your mind builds a story. This is subtle at first. Most people only notice emotions once the narrative has already started. The body shifts, then the mind labels, then the mind explains, then the mind escalates. Your goal is to interrupt earlier, at the point of emergence. You learn the signature of each frequency in your body. Anxiety often feels like shallow, rapid fluttering, a tightening in the chest or solar plexus, a forward-leaning urgency. Anger often feels like heat and pressure, jaw tension, clenched hands, a spike of energy. Sadness often feels like heaviness or an ache in the chest, a slowing, a softening. Joy often feels expansive breath, opening warmth, spreading a sense of ease and connection. Don't analyze what caused it. Don't argue with it. Don't explain it. Just recognize the channel shifted. That recognition is your leverage point. The earlier you catch the shift, the less momentum it has. You're not stopping emotion, you're preventing it from becoming an identity. The second practice is clean broadcasting. Once you recognize that a frequency has arisen, make a conscious choice, neither suppress nor amplify. No pushing it down. No feeding it with story. No distraction. No performance. You allow the wave to move through you cleanly. This requires relaxation more than effort. It requires presence more than control. It often looks like this. Soften your shoulders, unclench your jaw, lower your breath, and place attention on sensation rather than narrative. If it helps, silently mark time. 90 seconds is a useful window because it reminds the mind that this is a wave, not a verdict. In those 90 seconds, you are not trying to feel better. You are letting the frequency complete. You are preserving signal clarity. The third practice is channel data extraction. After the wave peaks and begins to shift even slightly, ask a precise question. What channel does this frequency indicate? I've been tuned to fear and anxiety. Usually indicate a threat channel, scanning for danger, rehearsing loss, seeking control. Joy indicates an opportunity channel, openness, connection, creative probability. Anger indicates a boundary channel, limits being tested, sovereignty, needing reinforcement. Sadness often indicates a release channel, something ending something. This is not therapy analysis. It's instrumentation reading. You are identifying the channel you are broadcasting. The fourth practice, conscious channel selection. Now you decide, do I want to continue transmitting on this channel? Or do I want to retune? Retuning is not a mental slogan. It is a physiological shift that leads to behavioral change. You can retune through breath, longer exhale, posture, stand taller, open the chest movement, walk. Shake out tension environments, step outside change rooms, or attention shift focus from hypothetical future to present sensory reality. You can also retune through action, one small aligned step that belongs to the channel you want. If threat is present, but you want to move into determination, the smallest act of agency retunes you. Send the email, make the call, write the first paragraph, put the shoes on, create movement. The nervous system reads action as evidence. Evidence stabilizes signal. The fifth practice is coherence maintenance. Coherence is not achieved once. It is trained. It is built by repetition. Every time you let a wave complete cleanly, you reduce static. Every time you choose a channel and take an aligned step, you strengthen the new frequency. Over time, your baseline changes. And when your baseline changes, reality changes faster because you are no longer fighting yourself. This is the real secret behind determination and completion. Determination is not only grit. It is coherence sustained long enough for the world to rearrange around it. When your internal signal stops contradicting itself, your behavior stops contradicting itself. When your behavior stops contradicting itself, outcomes begin to compound. So the goal is not permanent positivity. The goal is signal integrity. You allow what is present. You read the data. You choose the channel. You act coherently. And you do it again. This is how you become not a passive feeler, but a conscious broadcaster, someone whose inner state is not at the mercy of the environment, someone who can enter chaotic rooms and remain stable, someone who can feel fear and still choose forward, someone who can experience waves without becoming the ocean. And when your signal becomes coherent, completion stops being a rare event. It becomes a predictable consequence of who you are, being one aligned step at a time. It is conscious frequency selection based on the channel feedback you just received. You are no longer treating your inner state as an uncontrollable weather system. You are treating it as signal intelligence. The frequency arrives, you read what it is telling you, and you make an informed choice about what you broadcast next, because what you broadcast next determines what you reinforce, what you notice, what you do, and which outcomes you keep inviting into repeatability. This is where the work becomes real, because the goal is not to feel good. The goal is to become coherent. Coherence is the stabilizer that turns your nervous system from a noisy transmitter into a precise instrument. Coherence is what allows the channel you choose to hold long enough to matter. Fifth, practice coherence cultivation. As you practice allowing frequencies to broadcast cleanly without suppression and without amplification, your emotional experience becomes progressively clearer. Instead of multiple conflicting signals overlapping inside you, you start to feel distinct waves. One frequency rises, peaks, and transitions. Another emerges. Your inner world becomes less chaotic, not because you have eliminated emotion, but because you have eliminated interference. Most people live in interference. They feel fear, then feel shame about fear. They feel sadness, then force positivity on top of sadness. They feel anger, then suppress it while smiling. Those layers create internal contradiction, static. And static produces scattered outcomes, inconsistent action, unpredictable relationships, repeated patterns that feel fated, but are really the result of unstable broadcasting. When you cultivate coherence, you reduce those overlapping layers. You become more like a clean radio signal. And as coherence grows, your reality tuning effect becomes more consistent, not because the universe is magically obeying you, but because your perception, decisions, and behavior stop contradicting each other. The same internal state produces the same type of action. The same type of action produces similar outcomes. Over weeks and months, your external reality begins reflecting your most consistently broadcast frequencies with increasing accuracy. Track this. Do not guess. Observe. Keep a simple log for a few minutes each day. What frequency dominated today? Threat, opportunity, boundary, release, determination, neutral, clarity. Over time, you will see the pattern. Your life is not random. Your life is coherent with your dominant broadcast. Once you establish competence with the foundational practices, recognition, clean broadcasting, data extraction, conscious selection, coherence cultivation, you can begin working with more advanced mechanics. These are not necessary to start, but they accelerate the effects once your signal is already stable. Advanced technique 1. Frequency layering. Layering means you consciously combine compatible frequencies to create a composite signature more nuanced than a single state. Most people layer unconsciously in ways that create interference, joy plus fear, confidence plus unworthiness, calm plus resentment. That produces dissonance. Layering done deliberately is different. You select two frequencies whose wave patterns support each other, constructive interference rather than destructive interference. The result is a richer broadcast that resonates with more specific probability channels. For example, joy layered with determination creates the signature of joyful accomplishment, creative energy, plus follow-through. Calm layered with curiosity creates discovery, steadiness, plus exploration. Gratitude layered with focus creates consistent opportunity, recognition, appreciation, plus action. Compassion layered with boundary, clarity creates safe connection, warmth, without self-erasure. How do you know whether a layering combination is compatible? Your body tells you. Compatible layering feels stable and harmonious, like the frequencies amplify each other. Incompatible layering feels jittery, strained, or split, like your system cannot hold the signal. Experiment carefully. Do not force. Choose one pairing for a week and observe. Your body is the diagnostic tool. If you feel more coherent, you are layering constructively. If you feel more scattered, you are generating interference. Advanced technique 2. Frequency amplification. This is where people often make the mistake of trying to be happy. That is not amplification. That is performance, and performance creates static. Real amplification is physiological anchoring. Once you have identified which frequencies reliably tune you toward beneficial channels in your life, calm in meetings, curiosity in learning, determination in execution, you can strengthen those signals through repeated embodied cues. Amplification can be breath, rhythm, posture, movement, environment, and rituals of attention. If calm improves your work outcomes, amplify calm through slower exhalations, relaxed jaw, open chest, unclenched hands, a steady gaze, and a reduced pace of speech. If determination improves your results, amplify it through a posture of forward commitment, feet grounded, shoulders back, and a clear next action, chosen before you allow the mind to wander. The key: you do not amplify by pretending. You amplify by stabilizing the physiology that produces the signal. Body lead. The mind follows. Advanced technique 3. Frequency redirection. This is critical frequency. Energy does not disappear when you suppress it. It displaces into tension, into shadow behavior, into compulsions, into leak. Suppression does not neutralize energy. It buries it, and buried energy returns as symptom. Redirection means you respect the energy and change the pattern. Anger is high energy. It can become destruction, or it can become determination. The amplitude is similar, the waveform is different. Anxiety is activation energy. It can become chaotic threat, scanning, or it can become focused alertness and present. Sadness, release energy. It can become collapse, or it can become completion and renewal. Redirection is not denial. It is a skillful conversion. You keep the charge, you shift the channel. Here is a concrete example. You are about to enter a high-stakes conversation, an interview, a negotiation, a difficult boundary-setting moment. Anxiety rises. You feel the rapid, shallow oscillation in your chest. The traditional response is either suppression, calm down, stop it, or obedience, I'm anxious, so I must be unsafe, so I should shrink. The frequency-conscious approach is different. First, you recognize the frequency at emergence. You name it internally: threat channel activation. You do not argue. You do not feed it with catastrophic story. You allow it to broadcast cleanly for its cycle. You let it peak without layering shame on top of it. Second, you extract the channel data. My system is currently tuned to threat. My probability field is being filtered through threat interpretation. Third, you select: do I want to stay on threat, or do I retune? If you choose to retune, you do not fight the activation energy. You use it. High-stakes arousal is not your enemy. It is fuel. You redirect it into focused present. How you shift waveform. You lengthen the exhale slightly. You open posture. You bring attention to sensory reality. The feel of your feet, the sound in the room, the temperature of the air. You narrow focus to the next actionable step. Speak the first sentence clearly. Ask the question directly. State the boundary calmly. This converts chaotic arousal into coherent alertness. Same energy, different pattern. And that pattern change can produce a radically different outcome. One person enters broadcasting incoherent anxiety, forgetting key points, shrinking, triggering uncertainty in others. Another enters broadcasting coherent presence, speaking clearly, remembering what matters, eliciting respect. The external situation is identical. The internal channel is not. Now we need to address something most people never consider, but which explains repetitive life patterns with unnerving accuracy: standing wave. A single emotional wave rises and completes, but habitual frequency pattern states you return to again and again can create persistent resonance in your field. Think of it as a default station you keep tuning back to. Even if each individual episode is brief, repeated return creates a stable pattern, a standing wave. If you return to anxiety 10 times a day, you are not just experiencing anxiety, you are building an anxiety baseline. Your system begins to treat threat scanning as normal. Your attention keeps amplifying threat-compatible evidence. Your decisions keep prioritizing safety over expansion. Your relationships begin adapting to your defensive posture. Opportunities feel risky. Life feels hard. Over time, your environment begins to match that standing wave, not because the world is punishing you, but because your baseline state repeatedly selects the same channel. Resentment can become a standing wave. If you repeatedly return to resentment, rehearsing betrayal, replaying disappointment, you build a conflict baseline. You interpret neutral actions as disrespect. You expect people to fail you. You tighten your trust. You act from guardedness, and guardedness invites distance. The pattern continues. Unworthiness can become a standing wave. If you repeatedly return to, I'm not enough, you build a diminishment baseline. You underprice yourself. You over-explain. You hesitate. You avoid visibility. You accept less. Then life reflects less, and the belief feels proven. Standing waves are why people keep meeting the same partner in different bodies, the same conflict in different workplaces, the same scarcity in different cities. They change external circumstances, but they carry the broadcast. The transformative practice is to identify your standing waves and shift them at the baseline level, not just manage individual emotional instances. This requires honest tracking and sustained practice over weeks and months. You identify the frequency you return to most often. You identify the triggers that pull you back: certain conversations, certain thoughts, certain environments, certain habits, sleep deprivation, doom scrolling, caffeine overload, isolation. Then you train a new default by completing the wave cleanly and choosing a retune consistently. This is not be positive. This is not forced optimism. This is pattern interruption. You notice the slide into the habitual frequency early. You allow the wave to complete without feeding it. You extract the data. You choose a different channel. You take one aligned action that belongs to the new channel. And you repeat until your nervous system learns a new default. Over time, the standing wave changes. And when the standing wave changes, the entire life pattern changes, because the channel you keep returning to is no longer the one that kept you trapped. This is the deeper promise of frequency work: not control but command, not suppression but coherence, not chasing outcomes but becoming the kind of signal that makes better outcomes statistically inevitable, because your perception, physiology, and behavior are no longer broadcasting against each other. The moment you stop treating emotions as enemies and start treating them as channel feedback, you stop being dragged by your past. You become the operator of your present. And when you change the station you live on, you stop repeating the same reality, because you are no longer broadcasting the same standing wave. Over time, this rewires your standing wave pattern. And when standing waves change the baseline probability channels, your field resonates with change as well. What used to feel like the kind of things that always happen to me begins to lose its grip, not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because the default station you keep returning to has shifted. The field is no longer being fed the same repetitive signal, so it stops collapsing the same repetitive outcomes with such reliability. Once you can work with your own standing waves consciously, another layer becomes visible. You start recognizing standing waves in other people and an entire environment. When you walk into a workplace, a home, a social gathering, you are not only detecting the momentary frequencies people are broadcasting in that moment, you are also sensing the accumulated pattern that has been built into the space through repetition. A room is not empty. A room is a container, and containers hold patterns. A workplace where people have habitually broadcast stress, competition, resentment, and fear for months or years can develop a stable field signature. Even before anyone speaks, you can feel the tone of the space. It is not simply the mood of the day, it is the standing wave of the culture. That standing wave resonates with scarcity, threat, and conflict channels. In practical terms, it means the space tends to produce certain predictable experiences: miscommunication, defensive behavior, sudden escalations, chronic exhaustion, and opportunities that feel constricted rather than expansive. A home where people have repeatedly broadcast safety, affection, acceptance, and creative play also develops a standing signature. You feel it the moment you enter. Your shoulders drop, your breathing changes, your nervous system begins to entrain toward calm. And as your body entrains, your attention starts scanning for different evidence, connection rather than danger, possibility rather than threat. This is why some spaces consistently produce certain types of outcomes, regardless of who occupies them. The field pattern of the space itself becomes a tuning influence. It is not mystical. It is repeated frequency behavior leaving a stable imprint. You have experienced this without naming it. Some buildings feel heavy. Some rooms feel tense. Some places feel inspiring, even when nothing special is happening. That is standing wave physics applied to human nervous systems. A location becomes a reliable resonator because it has been fed the same broadcast for so long that it tends to amplify similar channels again and again. And here is the practical power you can work with this consciously. If you occupy a space regularly, your home, your office, your studio, you can intentionally build beneficial standing waves through sustained coherent broadcast. This is not about pretending to be calm when you are not. It is about choosing what you repeatedly reinforce. If you consistently generate coherent calm in your home for weeks and months through regulated breath, softened body posture, reduced conflict loops, honest communication, and daily moments of stillness, you begin building a calm baseline in that space. Then something subtle happens. The space starts doing part of the work for you. When you return after being away, your nervous system finds calm faster because the environmental field is already resonant with it. Visitors feel it too. Children entrain to it. Arguments de-escalate faster. Sleep improves. Creativity returns. You have built a standing wave that tunes probability channels toward peace and connection. This is the mechanism behind what many ancient traditions called blessing. A space consecrating, a space clearing, a space. Strip away the language and you are left with the precise process, repeated coherent broadcast patterns, stabilizing a field signature over time. The science vocabulary is different, but the human experience is the same. Now zoom out. Once you fully integrate the recognition that emotions are electromagnetic broadcast frequencies rather than subjective feelings requiring psychological management, your entire relationship with lived experience changes. First, you stop judging frequencies as inherently good or bad. Every frequency selects a channel. Fear is not bad. It is threat channel tuning. Joy is not good. It is opportunity channel tuning. Anger is not wrong. It is boundary channel activation. Sadness is not weak. It is release and completion. The moment you remove moral judgment, you remove unnecessary interference. You can finally hear what the frequency is saying. Second, you stop identifying with the frequency as your identity. You are not an anxious person. You are a consciousness operating a biological transmitter that sometimes broadcasts anxiety. You are not an angry person. You sometimes broadcast anger. This distinction is not philosophical, it is functional. The moment you stop merging your identity with the signal becomes easier to let complete. You stop feeding it with story. You stop defending it. You stop suppressing it. You let it do its job, deliver channel data, then transition. Third, you develop frequency flexibility. Instead of getting stuck in one channel for hours, days, or years, you move fluidly. A frequency rises, you observe it. You extract the data, you make a clean choice at the transition point, and you retune. Your field becomes adaptive. And adaptation is power because it means you are not trapped in the same probability lane just because your nervous system learned it long ago. Fourth, you recognize frequency contagion in real time. When you enter collective fields, you can feel the pull to entrain. You can sense whether the group is broadcasting threat, resentment, numbness, or expansion. And you can choose consciously whether you are going to merge with that channel or hold your own coherent signal. This is not about superiority. It is about sovereignty. In a fear-saturated environment, your nervous system will try to match the dominant frequency because entrainment is efficient. It saves energy. It helps the group stay synchronized. But synchronization is not always healthy. Sometimes the entire room is tuned to a channel that shrinks everyone. You can feel it because your body starts contracting in response. Conscious frequency work gives you a choice: entrain or anchor. And when your signal is coherent enough, you can do more than resist contagion. You can influence the collective field. Calm can soften a room. Determination can cut through group paralysis. Clarity can interrupt emotional spirals. Not because you are special, but because coherence has amplitude. A clean signal carries weight. It shapes the pattern around it. This also explains why some rare individuals seem to carry stability with them. In chaotic environments, they remain steady, not numb, not detached. Steady. Their coherence is so consistent that their local probability field stays stable even when collective fields fragment. They are not immune to emotion. They are skilled at completing frequencies cleanly and selecting channels deliberately. Now, the deepest insight, consciousness itself is a coherence generator. When you are unconscious of your emotional frequencies, treating them as random feelings that happen to you, they tend to become messy. You resist, you amplify, you loop, you suppress, you label. You create interference. You broadcast contradiction. You become scattered. But the moment you bring clear awareness to a frequency as it arises, witnessing it, without judgment, without manipulation, that awareness begins organizing the signal. Not by force, by presence. Your attention acts like a stabilizing lens. This is where the language of quantum mechanics becomes an evocative metaphor. Observation changes what is observed. Whether or not you interpret that literally in physics, the psychological and biological mechanism is obvious. Attention reduces fragmentation. Presence reduces story. Witnessing reduces identification. And reduced story means less amplification, less resistance, less interference. The frequency becomes cleaner because you are not distorting it. So the core practice is not complicated technique. It is sustained awareness. Notice the frequency. Feel it in raw sensation. Let it be there. Let it peak. Let it move. Do not add narrative. Do not add shame. Do not add performance. Observe long enough for the system to complete its cycle. As you do this, you begin to notice something else: transition windows. A frequency does not instantly snap into another. There is a brief, in-between seconds, sometimes only moments, where one wave is completing and the next has not fully locked in. Your system is between channels. That is a moment of maximum leverage. If you are unconscious during that transition, your nervous system defaults to habit. Anxiety completes, and the system goes right back to anxiety. Anger completes, and the system drops into resentment. Sadness completes, and the system collapses into numbness. You do not choose, your conditioning chooses for you. But if you are conscious during the transition, you can select what comes next. You feel the anxiety wave begin to soften. There is a tiny opening. In that opening, you choose calm, curiosity, determination, gratitude, presence. Not as a forced emotion, but as a channeled decision. You redirect attention, adjust breath, change posture, or change environment. You allow your physiology to lead you into the next frequency state. This is why allowing a frequency to complete is so powerful. It gives you access to the transition window. It creates a real moment of choice. And this is also why the practice can feel intense at first. When you begin doing this consciously, you may feel like emotions are arising more frequently or with more power. That does not mean you are getting worse. It means you are finally noticing what has been happening all along. When you were unconscious, you were suppressing automatically. You were carrying constant background static, muscular tension, chronic mental noise, low-grade dread, mild resentment, so continuously that you normalized it. It became the water you swam in. Now you are allowing frequencies to broadcast cleanly, which means you are experiencing their real intensity for the first time, without numbing layers. This can feel overwhelming, but it is actually progress. The signal is becoming clear. A clear signal can complete. Static cannot. In the beginning, your job is simple. Do not panic when you feel more. Do not interpret clarity as danger. When you feel intensity, remember what it is: information plus energy. Let it peak. Let it move. Return to breath. Return to the body. Stay with the wave long enough for it to transition, because once you can hold awareness through intensity without interference, you graduate into a different relationship with reality. You stop being someone emotions happen to. You become someone who reads frequencies as channel feedback, chooses deliberately at transition points, and builds standing waves that support the life you want to consistently live. At that point, transformation is not a dramatic event. It is a baseline update. And baseline updates change everything. Not through force, but through coherence, sustained long enough to become your new normal. The anxiety you suppressed automatically for years may feel much stronger the first few times you allow it to broadcast for 90 seconds without resistance. That intensity can be startling, especially if you've spent most of your life treating anxiety like an intruder you have to fight, distract from, or outrun. But what you're experiencing isn't failure. It's the backlog clearing. For years, you weren't eliminating frequencies, you were compressing them. You were stacking unfinished oscillations behind a wall of tension and distraction, turning clean signals into constant background static. When you finally stop resisting, those unfinished broadcasts surface, not to punish you, but to complete what was interrupted. Your system has been trying to deliver channel data through a suppression layer. It learned that subtle signals don't get through, so it amplified the signal. It escalated. It raised the volume, not because the reality was more dangerous, but because your awareness was less available. When you begin allowing frequencies to broadcast cleanly, your nervous system doesn't trust you yet. It has years of evidence that you won't listen unless it shouts. So initially, it shouts. This phase is temporary. The intensity decreases dramatically once your system learns a new pattern. I can broadcast at normal amplitude, and I will still be witnessed. After a few days to a few weeks, depending on how long you've been suppressing and how consistently you practice, the nervous system stops over-amplifying to break through numbness. It doesn't need to. You're present now. You're available. During this clearing phase, the practice stays simple and repetitive. Allow the frequency to broadcast cleanly. Extract the channel information. Choose consciously during the transition window. You do not need to win a mental argument with the emotion. You do not need to understand why in the moment. You do not need to make it meaningful or spiritual or productive. The nervous system is not asking for a story. It is asking for completion. A clean frequency completes. Static does not. As the backlog clears, another phenomenon becomes obvious. Your perception sharpened. You start recognizing what could be called frequency signatures in other people and in collective fields with increasing precision. Just as you can feel the difference between anxiety, joy, anger, and sadness in your own body, because each one has a distinct oscillation pattern, you begin detecting those same patterns in others. Not by reading their words, not by analyzing facial micro-expression, not by guessing motives, by direct nervous system perception. This is not mind reading. It's not mystical intuition in the dramatic sense. It's your electromagnetic system detecting coherence and oscillation patterns in proximity and responding through resonance. Humans have always done this. Most people simply do it unconsciously and call it a vibe, a gut feeling, or something feels off. Frequency consciousness just makes it explicit. You walk into a meeting and you sense high-intensity, anger frequency coming from someone who is speaking politely. Their words are calm, but the broadcast is jagged and charged. Or you enter a social situation and detect deep sadness beneath someone's cheerful presentation. You can feel the dampened heaviness, the slow pulse under the smile. This gives you a serious advantage in navigating social environments, not as a weapon, but as clarity. When you can perceive broadcast signatures, you stop responding only to performance. You stop treating surface behavior as the whole reality. You begin responding to the actual field state. That changes everything about how you communicate. Someone is broadcasting anxiety while asking you a simple question. If you answer only the question, you miss the deeper signal. They are tuned to the threat channel. They aren't looking for information. They are looking for stability. The coherent response isn't more data. It's a calm presence, clear pacing, and grounded certainty. Someone is broadcasting anger while pretending to be fine. If you treat the surface as truth, you may inadvertently escalate the field by ignoring the boundary violation channel. A coherent response is not confrontation. It is clarity and boundaries, fewer words, clean limits, and calm firmness. Someone is broadcasting sadness while making joke. The coherent response isn't forced cheerleading. It's room for truth, a softer tone, permission to be real, and absence of pressure. But with that perception comes responsibility. When you can detect others' frequency signatures, you have to choose what you will do with the pull to entrain. Entrainment is not a moral failing, it's physics. Oscillating systems synchronize when brought into proximity. Your nervous system wants to match what is dominant around it because it is energy efficient and socially adaptive. If someone approaches you broadcasting intense anxiety, you will feel the gravitational pull to synchronize. Your chest tightens, your breath shortens, your mind starts scanning for threat. If you are unconscious, you entrain automatically and call it empathy. If you are conscious, you recognize the mechanism and choose your role. You can entrain matching their anxiety, amplifying the threat channel for both of you. Or you can hold coherence, maintaining a calm broadcast that gives their nervous system something else to synchronize with. This is what holding space actually looks like in frequency mechanics. It is not performing compassion. It is maintaining coherence in your own system so that your field becomes a stabilizing reference point. Not everyone will entrain to it immediately, but coherence has influence, especially when the other person's signal is chaotic and exhausted. When you recognize emotions as frequencies instead of feelings, you gain direct access to the tuning mechanism of lived experience. Not control in the dominating sense, not manipulation. Conscious participation. The quantum field, however you conceptualize it, contains a spectrum of possible outcomes. Your emotional broadcast acts like a channel selector. The field responds mechanically to the signal you reinforce most consistently. That mechanism has never been optional. It has always been operating. The only question has been whether you're conscious of it. Most people live as if emotions are internal weather, and then they wonder why their external life feels unpredictable. But if emotions are broadcast state signals that tune probability channels, then unpredictability is often just incoherence, contradictory signals, interference patterns, and unstable channel selection. Everything changes when you shift from emotion management to frequency awareness. Not because emotions disappear, but because you stop interfering with a precision instrument. You stop treating the signal as an enemy. You learn to operate it. Your broadcast determines your channel. Your channel determines your reality. And once you're fluent in frequency consciousness, another layer becomes possible: deliberate frequency protocols. A frequency protocol is an intentional sequence of states designed to tune you toward a specific probability channel. Think of it like composing music. A single note can move you, but a sequence structured timing transitions, harmonies creates an entirely different effect. Likewise, a single emotional frequency can shift your state, but a deliberate sequence can tune you to nuanced outcomes, creative flow, conflict resolution, peak performance, deep rest. This is not forcing emotion. This is orchestration. You're not trying to be positive. You're moving through available frequencies in a way that builds coherence and prepares the field for a specific channel. For creative work, for example, the protocol might look like this: first, clearance. Let whatever is present complete anxiety, irritation, fatigue, so your field isn't cluttered with unfinished static. Then, curiosity. 3 to 5 minutes of open inquiry without demanding answers. Curiosity widens your bandwidth. It invites possibility. Then, calm. A settling frequency that reduces mental noise and creates spaciousness. Calm allows ideas to surface without force. Then, activation, subtle excitement. Enough energy to move from reception into expression. Then determination. Coherent focus in the 16-20 Hz range that resonates with completion and sustained output. Notice what makes this work. Each frequency prepares the nervous system for the next. Curiosity opens. Calm stabilizes. Excitement energizes. Determination completes. You are not battling your state. You are guiding it through coherent transition. For difficult conversations, the sequence might be grounding, clarity, compassion, direct expression, not niceness, not avoidance. Coherent truth delivered from a regulated nervous system. For physical performance activation, focus, flow, sustained power. The body knows these transitions. You're simply learning to cooperate with them rather than sabotage them with interference. For deep rest, release, softening, trust, surrender. Rest is not achieved by effort. It is achieved by removing the frequencies that keep the system in threat vigilant. Over longer time scales, weeks, months, years, consistent frequency, work changes something even deeper: your default resonance. Most people have a default frequency they return to when nothing is happening. For many, it's low-grade anxiety, mild dissatisfaction, subtle vigilance, and almost invisible contraction. That feels normal because it's familiar. That baseline broadcasts continuously. It tunes the field toward scarcity and threat, even when nothing threatening is objectively present. When you practice frequency consciousness, consistently allowing cycles to complete, choosing during transitions, cultivating coherence, your baseline rises, not into forced happiness, into regulated openness. Baseline well-being, calm presence, a mild positive coherence that resonates with opportunity and connection channels. This is not spiritual bypassing. It is what happens when you remove suppression, reduce rumination, and stop reinforcing threat loops as your default signal. Your nervous system learns that coherence is safe because you are no longer creating chaos inside yourself by fighting your own signal. And when the baseline changes, life changes, because you are now broadcasting a beneficial signal even when you're not doing the work. Your standing wave becomes supportive rather than sabotaging. The field's default resonance starts amplifying a different class of probabilities, so outcomes begin to cluster differently. Better timing, cleaner connections, fewer unnecessary conflicts, more stable opportunity. People describe this as life finally working with me. It feels like being in the right place at the right time, like doors opening without force. But it is not magic. It is resonance. This is also where the collective impact becomes real. When your baseline frequency is coherent and elevated, you contribute that signal to every group you enter. You become a stabilizing presence. Not because you're trying to fix anyone, but because coherence influences collective field. A coherent person in a chaotic room changes the room's option. It becomes easier for others to regulate. The collective threat channel loses a little amplitude. Other channels become accessible. Multiply that effect across enough individuals and entire environments change. Workplaces become less toxic. Families become less reactive. Communities become more connected, not through moral preaching or forced positivity, but through physics resonance patterns, shifting because coherent broadcast becomes more common. And when you truly let this land, your day becomes different. Every emotional frequency that arises is no longer a problem to solve. It is channel feedback. It is data. Every moment becomes a choice point. Which channel am I reinforcing right now? Every interaction becomes a question. Am I entraining to a collective pattern, or am I contributing coherence? This is what it means to live frequency conscious. You're no longer a passive recipient of reality happening to you. You're a conscious participant in the process through which reality crystallizes from possibility into experience. Your emotional frequencies are the interface. Your awareness is the choice point. Your coherent broadcast is the signal that determines which version of reality becomes most likely to meet you next.